This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson. We have a great episode coming up for you this week where we are going to be discussing two different musicals that each use modern pop music to tell the story of legendary people. I'm talking, of course, about Hamilton and The Greatest Showman. I saw Hamilton very recently and I had a chat about it with Tonia and Michael Gordon Shapiro. You can hear that discussion after a discussion I had with David Herzog about The Greatest Showman. David Herzog, hello.
What's happening, fella? Good to see you.
Well, we are going to the cinema tonight.
This is the first time we've been to the cinema together, hasn't it?
We've seen Whose Line Is It Anyway live. We've seen
did,
other shows and stuff, but we are walking the 85-mile high climb to get to the cinema here at beautiful Westfield.
We're going to the big top.
Other cinemas are available. Yes, we are seeing The Greatest Showman, starring Hugh Jackman and Zac Efron and Michelle Williams and someone whose name I can't pronounce.
Is it Keela, Seattle you're talking about?
That's the one. When one says Barnum, musical theatre fans think of a musical called Barnum.
That's right, absolutely just called Barnum.
With a great Cy Coleman and Michael Stewart. Is it Michael Stewart's score?
That I'm not sure. I know it starred Michael Crawford originally here, and it starred the great Jim Dale on Broadway.
When you discovered that this musical had a pop style to it by Pasek and Poole, what did you think?
I was very happy to find that out before I saw the film, because I was expecting, songs that were contemporary to the period piece, so potentially vaudeville, potentially minstrelsy. So I'm glad I was sort of warned ahead of time.
Have you listened to any of the songs?
I haven't heard any of the songs yet. I'm a little bit familiar with Pasek and Poole's work, not terribly. I've, of course, seen La La Land like most folks. I've listened to a little bit to Dear Evan Hansen, and that's about it.
Well, they only did the lyrics for La La Land.
Yeah, exactly,
Christmas Stories, their other more traditional musical theatre. They also did songs for the second series of Smash.
Did they really? Now, see, that I wasn't aware of. Didn't Showman do the first series?
Well, there were two musicals going on. There was the Marilyn Monroe musical, and then there was the other kind of modern New York.
So I never saw season 2. Yeah. Shame on me.
Shame on you. Mark, shame on you. I have heard some of the songs, and I wasn't a massive fan of them when I heard them, so I'm really curious now to see this film, the songs in the film and how they work in context. Because at the moment, to me, they're just, and I hate to say, they're just bland pop songs.
And it's always better to see things in context. I mean, the amount of cast recordings that I've heard that I didn't actually like on first hearing almost always work better in context. Perfect example for me was Avenue Q, which people will probably be astounded to hear. I did not like Avenue Q when I first heard the cast recording. Then I saw the show, and now I think it's one of the best cast recordings ever.
Oh, they're actually puppets. Okay, I get it. Is that what you thought?
Yeah, because if you don't see it without you can sort of picture it, but it's like, unless you see especially that kind of a show, you have to see that on stage. Spamalot, when that came out, it was the same thing. I can never put just a cast recording or a film soundtrack just on its merits alone. I have to see it in context.
There's about 11 songs in this tonight, so that's quite a lot.
Really?
That's quite a lot for a film musical.
For a whole musical, yeah, absolutely.
A couple of reprises. It's nice to have a big musical back again. I mean, the last one was La La Land, wasn't it?
That was the last one. Yeah, and it's always great for Hollywood to come up with something. They seem to be doing them annually now at this point. At least they seem to be trying to. And Hugh Jackman's great. I'm always happy to say Hugh Jackman's one of my favorite performers. It's always great to see him and stuff.
Apart from Les Mis.
I like to be even in Les Mis. Like, I did not get most people's gripes with Les Mis. I really enjoyed Les Mis.
So whatever we think of the piece, it's nice to have a big Hollywood musical. And it sparked people's interest in J.P. Barnum, hasn't it?
Yeah. But hasn't Barnum and Bailey Circus closed recently? I swore I either heard a rumor that it was about to close or is closing. I know they had a huge change in their events and the fact that they officially took all the animal acts out of their circuses recently, thanks to popular demand.
Well, they've been banned here for ages.
Have they?
Yeah.
Oh, you're so much more ahead of the times than us. But that's going to be one of the interesting things to see about this show as well, because, I mean, obviously it's only recently they got rid of the animal acts in the Barnum and Bailey circuses, but, researching P.T. Barnum's work, I mean, Great Showman, I don't think anybody could argue that, and that's probably what we're going to be seeing showcased in this film mostly tonight.
He was the greatest showman.
Well, we'll see. We'll be the judge of that, by golly. But some of his acts were pretty brutal. I mean, I mean, let's face it, the people who were, sort of showcased in the freak shows and showcased as sideshows themselves weren't treated as well as they could have been a lot of times.
But apparently the film glosses over a lot of that.
I'm worried about that.
His racism and his harsh treatment of the people. But then some people are complaining it shows bad treatment of animals and they don't like that. So you've got to remember people moaning about this. This is a historical sort of portrayal.
Right.
It's
and
not...
I'm assuming no animals were harmed in the making of this film as well.
Some freaks were, but...
Yeah, maybe, yeah. some musical theater actors were trampled over.
I'm looking forward to seeing it, and we'll return with our thoughts post-film. Still here with David Herzog. Hello, David.
Hello, we're still alive.
Yes, I very much enjoyed The Greatest Showman.
Yeah, I think we're both surprised. Well, I'm surprised you enjoyed it, because you're obviously always going to be the more cynical one between the two of us, aren't you?
I put the nick into cynical. You have to understand this is a pop musical, and I think had we not gone in knowing that, we probably would have been disappointed. It's so bombastic and showy. I don't think a small Victorian sound would have really worked for that film, would it?
That's a good point. It might not have. A big bombastic sound and score does go more appropriately with it. So, yeah, that is an interesting point. I never really thought about it from that perspective.
And also, if Barnum were to have, ironically, even though we said earlier his shows have stopped now, if he were to create a show nowadays, that's the kind of sound it would have, wasn't it?
That thought did cross my mind as I was watching. I wondered if the vision for the film was, what if P.T. Barnum put on his shows in modern day?
Now, I'd be interested to know the complete historical accuracy of what we've just seen, because we've had everything from the circus burning down to him having the idea... Oh, sorry, spoilers. To him having the idea of putting it in a tent. I fail to believe that, because we had Spiegel tents in Germany and things like that, didn't we? So
I don't think the idea of putting things in a tent was necessarily his idea, and that was my first thought watching it. Was, well, in a way, it puts this film in good company with films like Funny Girl, Yankee Doodle Dandy, films that are great on their own, but have little to no resemblance to the historical accuracy of the actual person they're representing.
At least we didn't have based on true events appearing.
And that's true. And they didn't. And I do wonder if that's why. I bet they took a lot of liberties with it historically. Is my point. It's because I know for a fact that the character of Tom Thumb, the real life person of Tom Thumb, was actually a child that they trained to act like a grown-up. Basically, it wasn't a man who was small stature.
You do wonder, where did all these, dare I say, freaks come from? Did New York have like a sort of underbelly of people with disfiguration? Because they all just appeared, didn't it? It wasn't really explained why they were all there.
I think they told their version of how they think the story would have gone, as it were. They took a fictional narrative license with it.
So the story is, the film opens at the height of P.T. Phineas Taylor Barnum's fame, and we have the flashback, and it goes back as from him as a child. And I actually really liked... A couple of things stood out to me. I really liked the visual style.
Oh yeah, visually was stunning.
I liked there was a lot of rhythm going on, even in just the street scenes with the trains, and there's even a bit when the horses were clopping along in time.
Oh yeah,
clopping? Is that a word?
Clopping, absolutely.
Clopping.
Yes.
Horses
prancing.
Were prancing. I like that. That's very musical talk. Were clopping along to the sound of the beat of the music. It was really enjoyable. A bit too many ballads in the score.
Yeah, that was
I would say.
misgivings about it.
I don't mind ballads, but I think you have to really be very clever when you're doing ballads in a film, because it really does drag the rhythm down. And they're very pretty songs, they're well-written songs, nothing against the songs. I just think a couple more moments in the film, if it were a stage musical, could have been musicalised. We had a very, very good song where Barnum is trying to persuade Mr. Argyle to join the circus. And that was very, very good. In the bar, we had a lot of kind of glasses being... It kind of reminded me of Beauty and the Beast, Hugh Jackman, when he was in that.
Yeah, it does harken back to that a little bit, yeah. And that was my favourite piece. That was my favourite song in the piece as well. Because it sort of broke up the monotony of it. Again, when you have too many ballads, or slow songs in general, love songs, duets, it does get a bit monotonous. A lot of musical theater pieces run into that problem nowadays. That's fine, so long as you have some moments to sort of break that up. You need... not necessarily comic interludes, but you do necessarily need things to sort of lighten up the atmosphere a little bit here and there.
As always with this, I mean, if it were a stage musical, Pasek and Paul would have a massive amount to do with it, and I don't know how that translates into the Hollywood world. If they would have conceived all the plot points, or they were just told, we want a song here, we want a song here, we want a song here. Mm-hmm. If they wrote loads of songs that would have been cut, I'd be interested to hear how this score was created. I'm sure it's all available online, but I'm very curious now.
Yeah. If I had to guess, I'd assume it was the latter, because they do feel slightly. I don't want to say the songs were shoehorned in, but obviously this feels very much like I said. Ultimately, it is a pop musical, isn't it? These are pop songs inserted into a historical piece.
Is that bad?
No, it's just not necessarily to my taste. But I agree with you. Ultimately, I did enjoy the piece, but at the end of the day, I think this is a piece that will mostly appeal to millennials. And millennials need their musicals, by golly.
Well, we are millennials.
I'm Generation X. We're Generation X.
No, millennials are born from 82 onwards.
Is it really?
Yeah.
That's what somebody was telling me this the other day. I think America's got it, as usual, has got it backwards. In general, it is my younger friends who are into the pop music genre that have been enjoying and raving about it. And I'm just not a pop music fan, so it was harder for me.
Obviously, when the credits are rolling, you said, what's the director done? And I said, this is his debut, and all he'd done up to this point was music videos. Yeah. And you said, it shows massively. But were you a fan of High School Musical? Because that was 10, and we had even Zac Efron in this to continue the trend. That was 10, 11 years ago, wasn't it now?
It was, but again, I'm showing my age. I'm not a millennial. So no, I've never actually seen the High School Musical films, but I did see Newsies, which was director and choreographer Kenny Ortega's predecessor to High School Musical films. And Kenny Ortega had a choreography background. He didn't have a feature film directing background. And so similarly to the director of Greatest Showman, it looks like they're directing more for the stage than for actual film. And so the acting is more melodramatic. And that's
lighting is more melodramatic.
Yes, which is great. It suits the piece. The piece knows what it is, I think.
You said there are some theatrically symbolic moments that kind of would work in this stage show.
Yeah, it's just obvious in-your-face symbolism, which you sort of need from the stage, because sometimes the symbolism needs to be visually in your face to reach the back row. It's just the sort of cliche moment of, is the person going to be alive? Well, if he wiggles his fingers, I guess we'll know. Or if he doesn't wiggle his fingers, he's like, is the father there watching his daughter at his ballet?
The daughters who never age.
The daughters who never age. But is the father present for the little girl's ballet show? Or is he symbolically missing? Well, let's see. It's a full house and there's one empty chair.
Which you think they would have filled last minute.
You think, exactly, yeah. It works for the film. The film knows what it is. It is slightly heightened and melodramatic, but it was absolutely fine. But that is sort of more appropriate for the stage, I think, ultimately.
And I probably quite enjoy it on stage. I preferred it much more over La La Land.
Now, I'm always going to go for La La Land over this because I'm a jazz fan. I'm not a pop fan.
But La La Land wasn't even good jazz.
I thought it was brilliant jazz. You're out of your mind, man. Out of your mind.
Out of your mind, man. It was out there, man.
It's far out, man.
You have a vast collection of film musicals on Blu-ray and DVD. Yeah. Will this be added to your collection?
Yeah, I always say I'm always going to buy every Hollywood musical that comes out, own it on Blu-ray, and I do. Some of them I have some of them I don't watch, and I had a hard time buying them. As a musical theater fan, I try to buy all of them. This one I'll have absolutely no problem adding to my collection and watching it again and enjoying it. As a matter of fact, there are some films that I like very much like this one that I thought were okay, and then when I took them home on Blu-ray and watched them, I enjoyed them a lot more. Best example of that was Les Mis. I enjoyed that in the cinema, but then when I got to watch it sort of better picture, better sound on Blu-ray at home, at the comfort of my own, in the comfort of my sofa and my onesie, it was a brilliant piece. I don't know why that changes it, so I'm looking forward to watching it again at home.
It was nice to see the cinema full. Well. Yes. It wasn't a massive screen, but it was nice. But again, just going back to what I was saying earlier, it's nice to see musicals back in fashion again. You can sort of thank La La Land for that, I would think, starting a trend. But Chicago, I think, really started it.
Chicago's the one that started it. I mean, I think Lloyd Webber thinks Evita started it. And Evita is a decent film. I enjoy Evita. But yeah, Chicago really kickstarted it, didn't it?
Because it's a better musical.
And it's a better musical, and it's a better film, let's be honest.
And it's coming back to the West End.
What? Chicago's coming back to the West End? What? You don't say. Tell us more.
Well, it's opening at the Phoenix. I knew it began with P. The Phoenix Theatre. To be honest, I went in expecting not to enjoy it very much because I listened to the songs and thought they were okay, and they're still only okay, but they do work. They're more interesting to watch than they are to listen to, which makes sense because it's a film.
You're not just being pleasantly nitpicky. I mean, ultimately, we did enjoy the piece.
Yeah.
Are you like me? Are you not a pop fan as well?
I would go home and listen to the original cast recording of Barnum with Michael Crawford over these songs, but I would watch the film again.
Yeah, certainly.
So I don't mind the songs in context, but when you see it in context, it works, and that is a sign of good musical theatre writing.
Yeah, I think we could appreciate, even though we're not the most massive pop fans in the world, we could appreciate that they are good songs for what they are, from what we know of the genre, and they serve the film well.
And also the score was very nice. The orchestral score in the film was great and really, really very touching. Now, the ending, we kind of had a let your freak flag fly moment from Shrek, where the freaks were saying, you know, I need to be accepted.
And that was one of the biggest criticisms I had of the film, actually, like a proper criticism, was that was a poorly misplaced number. They had two 11 o'clock numbers. It was really that one, and it was right in the middle of the film. But then they also had the other 11 o'clock number, which is the one that the freaks all sing with Barnum in the bar, and that was a fun song as well. They could have gotten rid of the one in the bar, even though that was a good piece. And they should have moved, if they were going to have the song that the sort of cast of freaks sing, that the oddities, as they're also called, because I hate using that word freaks. Oh, God. It makes my 21st century body shiver with awkwardness. But the song that they say for them, the sort of, aren't we beautiful, aren't we fabulous? That was the sort of general theme of the song. The song has its place, but it's an 11 o'clock number, and it was right in the middle of the film, and I thought it stuck out like a sore thumb.
It's Let Your Freak Flag Fly from Shrek.
Yeah.
And it comes at that point in the show.
It's Shrek. What point does it come? Is it the 11 o'clock number, or is it in the middle?
It's towards the kind of 2/3 through Act 2.
Which is where it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
But this one, like I said, really stuck out like a sore thumb in the middle of the film, and it didn't seem like it... That was the one song that didn't seem like it belonged where it was. It could have gone in later on in the film, or not at all.
I enjoyed the song, though.
Yeah, oh yeah, good song. Just very misplaced.
The character you and I both like was the film critic, the theatrical critic, who kind of hammers in the theme about he and Barnum had this kind of fisticuffs saying, you're a theatre critic, but yet you hate, you know, you don't smile during the theatre, and that's really interesting, especially for some of us on this podcast. And he also gave us the theme of what you did on stage is actually quite great. You've got all these different people of all these different visual inconsistencies together, and you made them all beautiful, which I don't think that theme wouldn't have been apparent in an earlier version musical of Barnum, I don't think.
No, yeah, I agree. And
it's a very millennial thing to put in it.
It is, and it's obviously an important thing to put in, and I'm glad they did it. And at the end of the day, I'm glad the millennials, the 20-somethings, the late teens have this film, because I think they will attach onto it very quickly, and I think it will... Do you think it'll get any awards, by the way?
Well, I don't know. I was thinking, I'm sure it'll be up for Best Songs.
Oh, yeah.
And very, very deserving as well. We have to say Hugh Jackman was astonishing.
All the cast did a really good job.
Yeah.
They really did.
Now, you were saying that now there's the Swedish opera singer who was very, very good. We had Queen Victoria was in it. Looked nothing like Jenna Coleman, so I was very disappointed.
That would have been cool,
and it could have done with a bit more humour. I think no one in the cinema laughed. I think that's...
Yeah, I agree.
And if you don't know the original musical of Barnum, go and listen to it, or even watch it on YouTube. It's everything this show wasn't, that this film wasn't.
Completely different things, yeah.
You know, very famously it has Michael Crawford doing a tightrope walk from one side of the stage to the other while singing a song.
Yeah.
And watch it. Go and see it at Menier Chocolate Factory, because it's a really, really strong, proper musical. This isn't a proper musical. This is a film pop musical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's still very, very enjoyable for being that.
It could be a proper musical, though. Again, it would be interesting to see it staged eventually. And that is a trend that I'm very much in favor of putting musicals on film first and then transferring them to the stage. We've obviously got the Broadway adaptation of Frozen coming up soon. which I think was always the intent when they made the film, was to eventually put it on stage, things like that. I find that quite exciting.
Are you telling me Disney didn't have a mass plan? Well, they probably didn't know in Frozen because they didn't know it was going to be a massive success.
I think Disney always has the MO of more cash, please.
Well, David, thank you very much for talking to me and joining me to see The Greatest Showman.
It's been wonderful. Thank you for coming to see a wonderful American film with me. I appreciate it, Nick.
So we've just talked about The Greatest Showman, and speaking of, I'm here with Mike Shapiro. Hi, Mike.
Hello, nice to be back.
How are you?
A little sleepy given the time difference, but otherwise not too badly. How about yourself?
Well, you're talking, which is good. I'm very well. I'm here with Tonia. Happy birthday, Tonia.
Oh, thank you.
A month or so, whenever it was, and we all sat in this same room where it happened, and we talked about Hamilton and how I was going to see it, and Tonia sort of was going to see it maybe, but then...
I couldn't get a ticket.
But then you couldn't get a ticket. What happened, Tonia?
So I entered the ticket lottery about for 2 weeks, and then about 2 days after we did a Hamilton recording, I won front row seats on the ticket lottery.
So, and I saw it last night, so the two of us in this room have seen Hamilton for a total of £45.
Yeah, front row seats!
Yeah.
I'm literally doing that non-stop, and I'm still happy about this, like a month after I've seen it. So I saw, I went the second week of previews to see Hamilton sat in the front row.
And I saw it last night, not quite sat in the front row. I sat, as we all know, in row G of the upper circle. We said, Mike, that we'd all meet and talk about Hamilton.
And now we're on a level playing field.
Yes.
Unlike last time where Nick was like, oh, that was good, like a little girl.
You know when you see something and it is so overwhelming, you're just a bit confused? And right. You think, I need time to process that, and I wish I could just rewind and go and see it all again. That's what I was... Because I was just standing around Victoria Station a bit bemused at what I just witnessed. And that is amazing that theatre can still do that in this day and age, because we've seen everything on stage, and then Hamilton comes along and completely sort of rewrites the rule book.
I mean, I said to you yesterday, I was like, oh man, I've already seen this, I want to see it again. It's so good. But I could have literally watched it all again. I could have sat on the front row and go, right, guys, come on, one more time.
Now, I told you my thoughts, didn't I, Mike, yesterday?
You said, and I quote, it was pretty good. And then I said, well, let's wait until we talk on the show to go into it further. So here we are.
That's my episode. Good night, everybody. It is, as I said, it's overwhelmingly brilliant. I will add a caveat that I don't, and Tony and I were talking about this before we started and sort of comparing it to Les Mis, I don't think I like Brechtian style very much. Because I found some bits when there's just no set and a desk a little bit hard to follow, and I thought some bits of the storytelling were a bit muddled, as, for example, his relationship with
Angelica
and Eliza, and then this prostitute or whatever she is that turns up.
Well, what is difficult about the domestic aspects of his life is historically we often don't know a lot about women in history, because no one cares about writing women's history down, because women are not important apparently, and a lot of the musical is speculation, it's guesswork from
it even
letters.
Makes comment about that in the room where it happens. We don't know what happened.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know what happened between them, so I think that is possibly not down to the directing and the staging, that's down to the actual story itself. I don't think that's anyone's fault. I think that is, he has to deliberately leave that ambiguous, because no one knows what happened.
I loved the more theatrical elements. For example, the Little Richard inspired Jefferson and King George. You know, as I said to Tonya, he needs his own show.
He steals the show,
basically. Yeah, I want George. I like that element. I like the kind of more pastiche stuff that we got in Act 2, the Boogie Woogie number, sung by Little Richard Jefferson, and, of course, the room where it happens, which I think, for me, was the highlight.
I think it's interesting that you thought of Jefferson as drawing from Little Richard. There was definitely kind of a stride piano feel, kind of Motown-era stylistic flavor to his Act 2 opener.
Yeah.
But as a hip-hop persona, I almost felt like he was channeling Flava Flav a little bit. You
know,
course. That high voice, kind of punchy, almost whiny tone, I guess.
Well, visually he looked like Little Richard because he had the quiff going on and he was quite small and he's quite camp in his kind of purple suit. So I don't know if... More like Prince in a way.
Yeah, I would say it reminded me a bit of Prince.
I mean, Tonya and I are massive fans of Flava Flav.
I heard that reference went right over my head.
Yeah. For me, it was more Little Richard because of the Boogie Woogie line, the boogie woogie riff in his opening of Act 2.
He was definitely had a kind of agitational quality, and there are a number of I guess rap archetypes, and one of them is the sort of nasal teasing voice that you get. I think Flava Flav was the first rapper to really bring that into the mainstream. I'm not a scholar on the subject, but that's certainly someone I associate that archetype with. So that was how I saw Jefferson as he was portrayed. The hair may have had something to do with the fact that they needed to recycle the same actor who played Lafayette in Act 1 and make him visually distinctive. So that may have been the plan with respect to his hair. Just bundle it up in Act 1 and then let it loose in Act 2. And
also, I don't know how the performer did it in your production, Mike, in LA, and you don't know how the performer did it in our production in London. So it might be different vocal qualities or something like that.
I think our Jefferson was quite different to the original Jefferson on the cast recording as well. They seemed, they obviously were the same material, but they had there's definitely a different quality there to the original Broadway cast recording. So obviously the performers have some license to change it up a little bit.
It's a joy of theatre, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I hope you get a London cast recording as
Me
well,
too.
because it'd be really interesting to compare the two, obviously the two different styles that we got.
Yeah, which brings me to the fact that there are only 3 changes in the lyrics, because there was lots of hoo-ha, like, oh, they changed so much there. When I was there, I literally noticed one different lyric. And then on Twitter 2 days ago, Lin-Manuel Miranda said, right, who can tell me what the different lyrics were? And they were so small, you can barely tell the difference between...
Because he didn't know? Or
No, he did, but the lyrics are like, for example, there's the joke about John Adams, and obviously a British audience isn't going to know who John Adams is, so he changed it to Vice President.
Right.
Instead of John Adams. So Vice President is not a real job anyway. Instead of John Adams doesn't have a real job anyway. And it's like, instead of Weehawken, which is that right? The place where the duel happens,
Right.
It's Jersey, because Brits wouldn't really get the other reference. But there's hardly any difference. So a cast recording, there wouldn't be any lyrical differences, but it'd be nice to have the different
the
interpretation.
timbre differences of character.
And that's an interesting question. You have had the benefit of hearing the original cast album, and unlike me, you've had the benefit of hearing the London cast. How would you contrast the two performance-wise?
At first, I was a bit kind of like, oh, wow, this is so different, because obviously the voices you're hearing are completely different. And for me, you wouldn't have this problem. For me, I've heard it so many times that I was like, okay, everyone sounds really different. But generally, I prefer the London cast, except for 1 or 2 performances which I thought were vocally weak. In quality, there wasn't a lot of contrast, but obviously there are going to be differences because it's different people performing it. Like I say, there was like a couple of people who I didn't quite like in the roles, so that made a little bit of difference to me. But generally, I liked everyone's performances, and I thought everyone's performances were strong.
The highlight is Michael Gibson playing King George, and we think that's because it's a British person playing a British person, whereas on Broadway it was Jonathan Groff. Jonathan Groff, and he's obviously an American doing what he thinks a British person is. So we get a lot more of an honest performance here, I think, and he absolutely.
And I think
steals
that's why
show.
he's gone down really well. Brits we're quite serious people, but we like satire, and we like we're quite happy to have the mick taken out of us. I think a little bit, and. He went down really well. Like, the British audience thought he was hilarious, and we were not offended at all.
You could hear a collective smile every time he came out on stage.
Yeah, he was like a panto baddie. Yeah, I really liked his performance.
And he even comes on from stage left.
Yeah,
as
like a panto baddie. And then in the last scene where he's on, he actually stays on and joins in, which I just thought was great.
And dances.
Yeah, brilliant. I just thought it was great.
One of the fun moments with him is during Act 2, where he doesn't have much to do, maybe just a reprise. How he sits on the sidelines, joyfully watching all the carnage and cheering it on, and in a way that is almost a metaphor for the UK's experience of Hamilton. This isn't. I don't have a dog in this race, but it's fun to watch.
It's interesting. I don't know, Tonia, how did this show begin for you? Before the house lights went down, what happened for you?
There was an announcement of King George saying, "Please turn your phones off and enjoy my show."
I overthought that and think, is this actually from his point of view as to what he thinks the events might be, or am I reading way too much into that?
I think you're reading way too much into it, because
right.
Aaron Burr is the narrator, but he just pop on and give his viewpoint of it, And there is that aspect of, okay, this is a show where, Americans are saying things like, the Brits keep shitting on us endlessly, but we have a British character also commenting the action in America. So you kind of get this double viewpoint thing. And even though he's a bit of a baddie, King George, at least we're still kind of giving as good as we get, almost. So I think that's why it goes over here quite well, because everyone's in on the joke almost, rather than us just feeling attacked.
So, Mike, did you get that in LA? The please turn off all your mobile phones, blah, 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 being announced by King George?
That I don't remember, but it's been long enough I couldn't tell you.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was just for us. And apparently they jazzed up the costume more. I don't know if that's true, but apparently the King's costume was more elaborate for us.
Well, wow. In a way, that's quite pantomimic as well, because I went back to Dick Whittington last night. It was a very long day for me. And every time Julian Clary comes out, his costumes get more and more and more elaborate. So I don't know if the show is now tailoring itself to British audiences for laughs. I don't know what people found comic in America, Mike.
Well, he's a fun character no matter what your nationality is. I think he may function in Britain differently than he does in the US, in that he's almost a sympathetic POV character, because he's commenting on American culture from afar, both politically and culturally as well. And, when he sits back and says, you're changing leaders, I didn't know that was something you could do. That's a very funny comment. Yeah. And I think it's almost channeling, obviously modern Britain is a democracy, but it's channeling some of the spirit of British culture and the lens through which Britain sees the US. So I think he's more of a secondary POV character for those across the pond.
And I'd be interested to see how this would play if a certain person was not the American president right now. Because what strikes me about this show is that it is so modern and so clever in its musical vocabulary and its presentation style and its casting choices and things. Do you think Trump has a kind of umbrella over the emotional connection with this show?
Well, it was obviously a product of the Obama era, and obviously it was really important during that, and obviously Obama had a lot to do with the original process of the show.
But the whole thing, like the famous line of "immigrants get it done" and all this.
Exactly. And I was about to say there is now, even though it seemed like a special thing during the Obama era, I think it's taken on a whole new level, because, like you said, and I don't know if this is the same when Mike saw it, the line "immigrants, we get the job done" was massively applauded afterwards, because it speaks to people possibly even more than it did.
You got a small one last night.
I got the Hamilton book for Christmas, which if you're a huge fan of the musical, I would highly recommend, because there are tons of interesting factoids in there that I did not know about. And I have read the bit about that scene, and apparently they had to add the 2 bars extra after, because during the previews every single night there was so much applause afterwards that they had to add 2 bars in.
I noticed that there was a pause, and I was watching the conductor, and he gave directions to the orchestra to stop and wait for the applause to finish.
It's because the audience would yell and scream over the next line and no one would catch it, so that's the reason they put it in. I think that it would really, I think it has taken a whole new level. But we've seen that here. I mean, with Brexit and everything, I think it really does. I think there was an interesting reaction in the audience, and an interesting reaction from the Daily Mail, of course, who absolutely hit. Well, I say absolutely hit. They gave it 3 stars, but they would never have liked the show because it's about immigration and it's very pro-immigration. So I think it has taken on a whole new level because of the political events that have actually happened over the past few years.
Mike, your turn to rap.
I hope you mean metaphorically,
yes,
and not stylistically. I think emigration has been a hotbed topic since the foundation of these United States. It's the source of arguments. It was a source of arguments in the early 20th century. I think the subject will never go out of style. As Tonia pointed out, the show was written during the Obama administration, and it probably has great resonance today because of the current political climate. And I think that line will always need those 2 bars afterwards to allow for audience response for as long as the show is running.
I'm surprised it's just 2 bars.
Well, actually, again, another factoid, they were going to put 4 bars in, but then they thought it was too much, so they went back to 2.
I want to give credit quickly to Cameron Mackintosh for building a beautiful theatre to put this show in. It's obviously Billy Elliot played there for many, many years, I think 10 or 11. And then Cameron, who always does his theatres beautifully, came in and literally gutted the whole building.
Yeah.
And started again. Obviously, I wasn't blessed with the greatest legroom, but I'm glad I sat where I did sat, because the lighting in this show was very, very special indeed. Like Matilda, you had sort of corridors of light being created and squares, and Tonia and I were chatting, and there's a beautiful song early in Act 2 where they're singing lullabies to their children, and you have these kind of doorway shadows being created.
Which I missed because I was on the front row, so I will admittedly say that.
And lighting is used for humorous moments, and it's used for storytelling moments with when we go back in time and things like that.
Which brings me to, this show was really funny. I didn't expect it to be this funny. I mean, the cast recording I'd heard several times before I had gone, and there are bits of it which made me laugh a lot. But the show is really funny, and that's another Brechtian device as well. So at first I was a bit like, I didn't expect it to be this witty. I expected it to be a lot more serious, and it was a really funny show. I thought it was. It is serious,
not just King George funny.
Yeah, it's not just like certain moments. So there were funny moments throughout, and that was like, you know, with the rap battles of the
mic drop.
Yeah, the rapping in the pub at the beginning. There was so many fun moments.
I think you need it though, because I think that's what Les Mis really suffers
lacks.
from.
I was about to say, yeah, it really lacks.
This has splatterings of comedy throughout, and it also makes the pathos a lot more effective when it does happen, unlike Les Mis, which is just death, 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 the odd birth, and then death, 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 death. That's my summary of Les Mis.
I mean, the scene where Philip dies, some of the most happy music in the whole show. Before, you know, where he's going to see Mr. Ika, and almost lulls you into a false sense of security, and there are so many kind of upbeat moments, and then these moments of real sadness actually kind of hit you quite.
But I was thinking, it is what could be quite a dull story told really, really well, and it uses hip-hop and rap and all that stuff to make it way more interesting. Yes, it's a great story, but it's not a story someone sat down and made up. You're telling absolute historical facts, sort of, in a way that young people can really relate to.
That's the genius. That's the reason this show is so successful. You say history to 16, 17-year-old, and some kids might be into that, but some kids really might not be into that. And this show speaks to so many people, the young people, old people. It doesn't matter. There are different things that appeal to everybody, but basically what he's done is taken a story which might not appeal to everyone on I mean, you say it's a musical about the guy that created America's banking system, and yeah, exactly. People go, what? But what he's done is taken history and put it into a language that everybody can understand. Everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. And I think that's the successful thing about this musical. Unlike Les Mis, which is really kind of confusing and very florid and kind of...
And also along those lines, the plot of Les Mis, or rather the subject of Les Mis, isn't really the political revolution that's going on. That's almost a context that allows character development and romance and tragedy to happen. Whereas Hamilton, in part, is a commentary on the birthing of America, and yes, through the political machinations of deciding whether the banks, whether we're going to have a national bank or just have a state-level banking system. And that's a fairly technical topic, but that's part of the subject of the story here.
It's not just the backdrop, but then also part of the story, which you managed to integrate really well, is the domestic life of Hamilton as well. Everything just kind of meshes together really well. Something we talked about in the previous episode was the historical facts, and I actually went and had a look into if he had ever tried to make it a little bit more historically accurate. And on YouTube there are some clips of songs from the original production that they did before, off-Broadway production that they did, and there are lots of details which he tried to include in the musical which were a lot more historically accurate, but in the end just got dropped, so to make the story a little bit more precise and a bit more streamlined.
Wow.
Yeah, but things like, for example, the fact that Burr turns on Hamilton was something to do with his wife dying because he lost his way politically after his wife died, and just little things like that all the way through. And just the fact that even though it's not that historically accurate, it's the reason that those kind of things got dropped out were because he wanted to make the themes and the story a lot clearer as opposed to being less historically accurate.
And I think why it's clever also is because if this was a made-up story, they would make Hamilton be this amazing hero, like they've done for Barnum, for example. here he's not very nice, is he?
He's a real human being.
Yeah, he's flawed. He has temptations and stuff, and the inability to check himself. Yeah,
and just stop writing or talking for 2 minutes.
Or womanizing, and I don't want to reveal too much for those of you who haven't seen it or listened to the songs. I therefore questioned, should we really care when he dies? Because A, we're told about it immediately in the beginning. And someone on Instagram, by the way, said, because I put a hashtag, I'm giving away my shot. And someone said, oh, thanks for spoiling the ending. And I thought I was saying,
Really?
You're told 18 seconds into
the musical, they get shot.
And it's not like this is hidden information.
No.
It's not. It's akin to, the Americans win
It's not like
revolution.
Elphaba
That's
doesn't
very
die
strange.
at the end of Wicked or something like that.
Well, we discussed the character of Hamilton with Mike before, whether he's a villain or not a villain. And something Mike said is that the musical never comes down on the side of he's a good guy, he's a bad guy. There was always a voice there commenting and actually telling you whether it's okay, whether it's not okay. There's like a moral conscience almost, which the chorus provide. I still don't come down on the side of villain with Hamilton, and I do feel sympathetic to him. I think he's slightly
because he's so human.
Yeah, he's so human, but also there's the element of redemption after his son dies, and him and Eliza rekindle their affection for one another, and also the fact that he dies is it 3 or 4 years after his son in exactly the same way. I think it's very moving.
It's such a stupid thing to do. I just sat there thinking,
Mike, me and Mike have had this conversation.
This is
before.
ridiculous. This happened. Oh, you've had a fight in the theatre. Just go and shoot each other.
But dueling was a thing.
I know.
Well, me and Mike
you
talked
think
about
so,
this.
huh?
Yeah.
We're going to have to settle this like men. Motivationally, it is odd. If you look at it just as a story, if you pretend it's fiction for a second and you were looking at the decisions, you would say, well, it's really weird that Hamilton... I don't know. How spoilery do we want to get here?
I've seen it, Mike. Don't worry.
It's history.
All right, I'm going to reveal this. Skip forward 10 seconds if you don't want to have every single plot aspect revealed to you. But how could Hamilton send his son to certain death or likely death, given that he is so familiar with the treachery of the dueling process?
Just raise your gun in the air and shoot.
I think that's the only problematic thing. So everything in the musical is represented in a way that we can understand as modern thinkers and modern people. Like, for example, everything becomes a rap battle, and when they're having a cabinet debate, or when they're they have banter in the pub, they're rapping with one another. I guess from the point of view of from the point of view of 21st century people, we think dueling is ridiculous. But I looked this up in the Hamilton book, and it was actually a technique that they did if they wanted to avoid conflict, was to shoot your gun in the air. It was actually a thing, so that the men could go out onto the battlefield and stand there like men, sure that they were men, and then they'll go home fine. But obviously, as 21st century people, we're kind of like, what?
But the dueling works well within the vocabulary of the music because of the hip-hop and the gang culture and all that kind of stuff as well.
And they do really explain in the song, the 10 Duel Commandments, exactly what happens during a duel. And actually, most duels did not end in death, or most conflicts were resolved.
And they always had a doctor on site and things like that.
So I guess it's kind of set up that this isn't possibly going to be a fatal thing. And then when it does happen, you're like, oh my God.
I understand everything you're saying, and they do presage dueling, and they try to explain it as well as they can in that song. I feel like somebody sending their own and only son into these circumstances in such a casual way. Oh, go ahead, just fire in the air, I'll see you at noon. It doesn't ring true, even though, ironically, it's true. From the standpoint of the story, I don't feel like it was well set up, and I didn't really connect to Philip's death for that reason, because I felt like it was just, well, of course.
I think because you expect Hamilton to be shot, but you don't expect his son to be shot.
I think that is why.
And then when Hamilton does get shot in the same way, it makes it more cathartic.
Can we talk about Hamilton's final monologue? I mean, on the cast recording, obviously, it's a standout moment because obviously the music drops away, and that moment on stage when it actually happens, when... Even though I knew it was going to happen, when all the music disappears and there's just Hamilton's final thoughts there with nothing, just his voice, it's such a striking moment. I think that is just, it is so
because it's
moving.
it's his internal thoughts, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Especially with the girl representing the bullet.
Which she does all the way through.
I thought that was very well staged, and no real gunshots, which I liked.
Something I'd quite like to say about the staging is how there is so much to watch, right? I'd like to, I mean, I sat up close and that was great because I managed to see so many details in it. But there are so many nice moments, even though there's a lot going on, like in the Battle of Yorktown, for example, there's so much to see. There are so many good still moments as well. I felt that whoever's directing really understood the importance of stillness on stage too. For example, when King George comes on, he just stands there and sings. And it is so effective. And the scene where they sing to their children after being born, so Theodosia and Philip, they just sit there and sing, and it's so effective. And you don't kind of drift off and think, oh, this is boring. It really grips you. The quality of stillness works so well in contrast to all the busyness going on.
Would you pay £200 to see it from the best seats? I'm talking from the front of the dress circle, or...
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
I want to see it from a bit further back, purely because I think I potentially missed some of the overall effect of the staging, as in...
The grand view.
As in our overall look of the stage. It was great to see it so far up, because I noticed so many things that the actors were doing you probably won't notice at the back. For example, the actor playing Hamilton had a tic where he kind of played with his right hand. He kind of like rubbed his fingers in his right. Like, it's weird. I don't know whether it was like a character thing, like he did a lot at the beginning because he was nervous, or he was just nervous. But actually, it didn't bother me. But I was that close, I managed to notice it, whereas someone at the back wouldn't have noticed that.
One unfortunate tic I did notice was Giles Tripura, who plays Ehrenberg, who was brilliant, but his voice takes a bit of getting used to because he has a slight speech impediment.
It's easy for you to say.
Exactly. Which, nothing wrong with that, but when you are delivering lyrics at the speed of light, sometimes it's a bit... Yeah, as you said, you get used to it, and
after 2 minutes, I got used to it, and
Yeah.
I didn't notice it. But for me, I can understand why you were a bit... you found some things really hard to follow. I know the score inside out and did know the score inside out, so I didn't have any problems following it. I can see why someone might, but I got used to it after a few minutes. I didn't think it was a problem.
If you think back to our prior episode, one anticipation I had was, Nick, you would have some issues with lyrical intelligibility. So I'm curious how that played out. Were you able to follow most of the dialogue and most of the rap lyrics, or were there moments where you weren't quite sure what was being said?
It was absolutely fine. I really enjoyed thinking, how's he going to rhyme that? Okay, and he does, and it's brilliant.
The lyrics are amazing in the show.
I did doze off, not literally, but at certain points. I think I said earlier, the slow songs are not as interesting as the upbeat songs, because he's so good at the upbeat stuff. You want more of that, and I thought the ballads were a bit middle of the road. They're very pretty, but he's better at the, insanely fast delivery, clever...
Like the epic scenes, like Yorktown, for example. I see what you mean.
I got a bit confused at certain points, but it all seemed okay in the end.
The strength of the music is the fact that there is so much repetition, but not needless repetition where it's just things repeated over
Not
and over
Lloyd
again.
Webber style repetition.
Or The Greatest Showman, I'm looking at you here. For example, My Shot. I'm not throwing away My Shot. It's repeated and repeated and repeated. It takes on a new meaning every single time.
I was going to say, what do we think the meaning of the word shot is in its numerous uses in the show? Because I was thinking
it's got
about
a double meaning. Yeah. So not throwing away his shot to make something of
his
himself.
Chants, his bullets, his things.
But then also his shot at the end, which he does throw away. There's lots of double meanings all the way through the show.
Did guns in those days have one bullet, Mike? Because you were around.
Let me try to remember. That seems likely. I think that you had to, tamp down on some gunpowder and put in a bullet, but I'm not an expert.
Would you like to sit down and listen to the cast recording again just to see if you can catch a bit more of the lyrics? Or
No,
do you think you managed to catch enough of it?
I would want to see it again, because it's not sort of music I can sit down and listen to, because it is so dense and so complicated. I would need to see it again in its theatrical blending with the storytelling and the movement and the lighting and everything wrapped around it.
It really does add a whole extra element to the whole thing. But I could sit down and listen to the cast recording. Over Christmas, saw my sister, who's a massive fan of R&B and hip-hop and all that kind of stuff, and she looked at me and she went, "You are the last person I thought would be interested in this musical." Like, literally, she's like, why do you like a hip-hop musical? And that's how good it is.
Because it's not a hip-hop musical.
Okay, but there's so much, you know me really well. Would you think that this is a musical that I would be interested in?
No, because there's no tap dance and
but
there's
also
no ballet.
It's not opera and it's not, it's not retro or anything.
Speak firsthand that you had to be peer pressured into listening to the cast album.
I did. So. I really did. We made a deal, didn't we, that you would watch something Crazy Ex-Girlfriend if I listened to it.
One interesting point about the cast album, and one argument for listening to it on its own, is that there's a level of detail that I think you're simply going to miss in the theater.
Absolutely.
And you can appreciate it on the cast album because you're listening to close mic recordings, and there are details, even in the orchestration and instrumentation, that are probably too subtle to hear live, but you can really appreciate on a recording. One example out of many in the second act, when Washington is advising Hamilton how to put forth his plan, his financial plan, the underscore is reprising the music from Right Hand Man, the battle motif, the planning for battle motif. So it's making an analogy to Hamilton and Washington plotting out their military strategy musically, which is really interesting. And I don't know if you could pick those details up in the
hadn't
theater.
noticed that, and I've listened to it 600 times.
I did notice two things. The left-hand piano riff comes back a lot that opens the very show, and at one point we have King George's harmonic progression over another song is kind of done over. I know a million people screaming at me saying, I
don't know what you're on about.
Yeah, it's there, and I did get that. So for that reason, I probably would, now I know the tunes a bit more, go away and listen to the cast recording
Can we
properly.
talk about how this has no overture?
That's not
But I think it's like, I love the fact there's no overture, because it literally, you dive
Bang, you're
straight...
in.
Yeah, exactly. It has such a quiet ending.
And what I love is that, again, adding to the Brechtianism, is that the conductor had bits to do as well. We had people coming out of the orchestra pit, which I quite liked. I'd love to know more about the director's concept for the piece as to what we are actually witnessing. Why is it taking place in this indoor, outdoor, bizarro space that could be anything and is everything that has a revolve?
That is a Brechtian element. So it's not just like, oh, we're doing this for a reason, but there are lots of different elements to Brechtian theatre. They lend themselves directly to the dramatic action that you see. So, for example, the reason why we have a narrator in a lot of Brechtian plays, but also that's trickled down into things like musical theatre, is to remind the audience constantly throughout that you're watching a show, so that they don't get too involved in the action, so that they can make a direct comment on what they're seeing. So to not lose themselves in the action, being completely, it's not necessary to remove them from the action. So not to provoke an emotional response, but to provoke a comment from the audience about what they're seeing. And I do feel like that is happening throughout Hamilton, because he wants you to, it really helps to hammer home the themes that are in it on legacy and the whole point of it, who tells your story, blah, 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 blah. There are elements, so the narrator element, the reason why it is very show and tell, that is very Brechtian, because they come on and they constantly remind you, not just where you are, but that you're watching a show, so that you don't get too involved in the action. And there are lots of other elements that also do that. For example, the fact that the chorus are constantly bringing on set, so there is a revolve that moves things on and off, but obviously things are being brought on and off, so the actors are always moving the sets. It reminds you that you're watching a show. Things like comedy is a massive thing. So comedy in Brechtian shows, they often use comedy to lighten a moment so that you don't get too emotionally involved in what you're seeing. But that is basically the idea. It lends itself to the drama. It's not just like, oh, we're being fancy, we're not having any set. That's the reason.
Do you think it's an old-fashioned technique and thus doesn't lend itself to this very modern voice? I think it works because the visual of the show is very old-fashioned, but yet the music is not. So I'm trying to work out, would Hamilton work if it was LED screens and it was all show off and moving sets and bridges and flying and all this kind of stuff?
I think it possibly would. And actually, I was listening to something the other day, and they were talking about mediums which they think like opera would work better in, or like future mediums of like potential future media for musicals and other things. And the thing that they were thinking about would be online comics. Yeah. Online comics, like illustrated with music over the top of, that you could rewind, you can look through. And I think Hamilton would work in like something like that, but it also works like this as well. To go back to your question, Brechtian is an old-fashioned style of theatre. It's from pre-war, the 30s, 40s.
That's why cabaret is Brechtian.
Yeah, but it does lend itself so well to this. I don't know whether they literally thought, let's do this in a Brechtian style, or it's just been an accident, but there is so much about it which is Brechtian. I mean, and that's a direct influence from other types of musical theatre. Like cabaret, for example, was a really good idea, because that set was really sparse.
Have any of you seen A Woman in Black?
No.
Mike?
Yes.
You have. So in A Woman in Black, we're sat in a theatre watching people work in a theatre do a show.
So what you mean is whether they're actors putting on they're just actors putting on a performance. I don't think that is it.
Which goes back to my theory of King George. It's like he has ordered this production to be put on.
And he constantly, he doesn't come out of character, but he constantly involves the audience in the action again, which is Brechtian as well, as opposed to kind of, the constant breaking of the fourth wall. I don't think it's supposed to be that, because obviously the characters they don't come out of character. If the characters came out of character and became themselves as actors, I would agree, but because they don't, I don't agree with that.
Well, the next time you'll be hearing about Hamilton will be, I believe, from Tim Saywood. Now, when I first met Tim years ago, about 10 years ago, he put forth the theory that hip-hop is the future of musicals. Quite clever of him, and I will ask him, will I win the lottery in 5 years' time, because he seems a bit of a soothsayer. The thing with hip-hop is, and this is what this show doesn't do, is when you put hip-hop in a musical, it's comic.
I remember seeing some shows at Edinburgh 2 years ago that were clearly inspired by not Hamilton, but In the Heights. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a next generation of writers who are going to imprint on Lin-Manuel Miranda's work and come up with probably some bad imitations, but also their own take on the genre, and musical theater will continue to adopt different contemporary musical vocabularies into its grand palette, as it always has. So I think we'll see hip-hop as a technique. We may not see complete hip-hop musicals, but I think it's a style and an element that's going to keep recurring from now on.
This musical just proves to you how amazing storytelling device hip-hop is. I mean, hip-hop songs are usually used as storytelling devices to numb a story within a song. I would think that now people realise actually how successful rap and hip-hop can be in a musical, that they'd be crazy not to use it as a storytelling device. But whether anyone could do it as well as Lin-Manuel Miranda can, that's obviously another question. I'm just looking at the programme, Mike, and we have a credit here called Alberton Programmer. It's my first question. And Beatmaster. First of all, Beatmaster, congratulations on that credit. I don't know what the heck that means. Yeah, I know Alberton. He's a nice guy. No, you probably are reading Ableton. Ableton, yeah. That makes a lot more sense. Yeah. Ableton is a DAW. It's a digital audio workstation music application like Logic, right, that is specifically tailored for live performance. That's kind of its niche. So I'm not surprised that Ableton was used to drive some of the music elements in the show. Well, that makes sense. It is such an intermixture of live performance and synth textures and beats and all of these things that need to be coordinated together. For example, the rewind bit where you hear the rewind and the sampling of Angelica's voice is not live, it's obviously recorded. And all the echoes and things and the delay. And we have da-da-da-da-da, which is bad brass samples on purpose. So we have Randy Cohen, the synthesizer and drum programmer. Then we have Taylor Williams, the associate synthesizer programmer, and Scott, the Ableton programmer and Beatmaster. I love that, Beatmaster. That's awesome. Mike, I presume you're going to go away and listen to Hamilton again, because we probably whetted your appetite for it again. Hamilton is no stranger to my personal playlist. I listen to it a lot at the gym. I listen to it while walking, and
Tonya listens to it at the gym as well, don't you?
I've never been to the gym a day in my life. Just going to put that out there.
If you're exercising, Right Hand Man and the Battle of Yorktown are great exercising tunes, because they're all battle-oriented and there's a kind of adrenaline to them that makes them great supplements to those activities. I think we're going to have to get Mike to put together his top musical theatre workout hits for Musical Talk fans. Yeah.
We're doing something at the moment.
That's true.
Your new project. So tell us about that again.
So if Musical Talk Time Machine was not torture enough, I've decided that this year I'm going to do...
I decided.
But you came up with the idea, but I said we had to do something. This year, every week, we would ask a different Musical Talk presenter to pick one of their favourite musical theatre songs and write about it on the new Musical Talk Song of the Week blog. So basically, every week, we will ask a Musical Talk presenter, whether it be Nicholas here, or Mike, or me, or Foss, or Dom. We'll pick a different song and we'll talk about why we like it on the blog, and we'll hopefully at the end of we might, as we go along, add them into a Spotify playlist so people can hear, and by the end of the year there will be 52 songs for people to enjoy.
Yes, lovely.
And you can go through the blog as you listen and see why we picked them. I'm such a nerd.
We all are. That's why we do this. Mike, thank you very much. You can go back to bed now.
Always a pleasure, and
thanks,
yes, I think
Mike.
I'm going to do that.
Sorry.
I'll talk to you later.
For more information about Musical Talk, please visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk. Email us at feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk. Listen to past episodes on iTunes and on YouTube, and follow us on our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Musical Outtalks.
You alright?
Yep, sorry.
Heartburn.
Just gassy.
Just excited.
I had really bad acid reflux last night, sorry.
There's one for the outtake reel.
You're covering your mouth, Mr. Herzog. Open your mouth when you talk to me.